Before the war drums echoed across the Pacific, before the skies above the Solomon Islands turned into deadly arenas of fire and steel, Joseph Jacob Foss was just a young man from South Dakota with a dream. Born on April 17, 1915, near Sioux Falls, he grew up on a farm during the rugged years of the Great Depression. Life was harsh, but it was also the perfect environment to instill discipline, resilience, and the unbreakable will to survive, traits that would later define one of the most successful American fighter aces of World War II. Foss grew up admiring Charles Lindbergh, whose transatlantic flight in 1927 left an impression on millions, including young Joseph. The boy's fascination with flying became a quiet obsession. At the age of 12, Foss and his father drove 200 miles just to catch a glimpse of Lindbergh during a stopover. It was a moment that would ignite the fire of ambition inside him. But tragedy struck. When Foss was 17, his father was killed in a car accident, and Joseph had to take responsibility for the farm. His dreams of flying were placed on hold, but they never faded. After attending the University of South Dakota and scraping together the money for flying lessons, Foss earned his civilian pilot license and joined the South Dakota National Guard. He knew war was coming, and he was ready. When the U.S. entered World War II, Foss requested transfer to the Marine Corps to become a naval aviator. By 1942, he had his wings of gold and was flying the Grumman F4F Wildcat, a rugged, dependable fighter, not as sleek or fast as the Japanese Zero, but able to take a hit and stay in the fight. He was 27 years old, considered old by fighter pilot standards, yet his age masked a calm, methodical mind. Assigned to Marine Fighting Squadron 121, VMF 121, Foss was soon deployed to one of the most brutal battlegrounds of the Pacific War, Guadalcanal. The island, covered in dense jungle and surrounded by treacherous waters, was the site of fierce ground, sea, and air combat. In the fall of 1942, the Japanese were determined to retake Henderson Field, the airstrip that was the key to holding the island. The Americans, under constant attack, needed pilots, and Joseph Foss was about to become a legend. Foss and his fellow Marines flew their Wildcats out of Henderson Field under almost impossible conditions. Supplies were low. Maintenance was minimal. The airfield was frequently shelled. The enemy, especially the Japanese Zero pilots, were experienced and deadly. Foss knew he needed more than bravery. He needed tactics. He studied enemy formations, coordinated with fellow pilots, and developed a system of mutual support in the air. The Wildcat was not superior in speed or maneuverability, but it could dive faster, absorb damage, and hit hard. His first air combat came in October 1942. Just 6 days, Foss shot down 6 enemy aircraft, earning his first ace designation. Unlike many fighter pilots who sought solo glory, Foss fought as part of a team. He and his wingmen, including future aces like Ed O'Hare and James Sweat, used discipline, communication, and precise teamwork to dominate the skies. By mid-November, Foss had amassed an incredible 23 aerial victories. He was dubbed Guadalcanal's leading ace, and soon the press caught wind of the story. Newspapers back home wrote about the flying Marine, who was downing Zeros at a record pace. His fame spread, but Joseph remained humble. For him, it was never about recognition. It was about protecting his fellow Marines on the ground and denying the enemy control of the air. One of Foss's most legendary days came on October 23rd, 1942. While flying patrol with his division, Foss encountered a large formation of Japanese bombers escorted by Zeros. In the chaos that followed, he and his group downed multiple planes. Foss himself claimed 5. It was one of the greatest single-day achievements of the Pacific Air war. Despite the triumphs, life on Guadalcanal was anything but glorious. The tropical climate was punishing. Malaria spread like wildfire. Sleep was rare. Foss himself contracted malaria, and yet he continued to fly until he was physically unable. He was finally evacuated for treatment in January 1943, after notching 26 confirmed kills. He had matched the record set by Eddie Rickenbacker in World War I, and he had done it in a few short months of combat. Joseph Foss was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in May 1943. In his citation, the words praised his indomitable fighting spirit and personal valor. But even that medal couldn't capture the full measure of the man. The way he led, the way he inspired, and the way he represented the quiet heroism of the American fighting man. When Foss returned home, he wasn't interested in basking in fame. He went on war bond tours, gave speeches, and continued to serve his country. But the sky always called him back. In the next part, we will explore his post-Guadalcanal career, his role in training new pilots, his continued impact on the war effort, and how he transitioned into a peacetime America that was still reckoning with the immense cost of victory. When Joseph Foss returned from the battlefield of Guadalcanal in early 1943, his body was weakened by malaria, but his spirit remained unshaken. He had become one of the most decorated aviators in the U.S. Marine Corps, a symbol of grit and determination. Yet he didn't see himself as a hero. His humility often caught people off guard. When asked how he shot down so many planes, he would often deflect credit, saying it was all about teamwork and luck. But the truth was far more complex. Behind his soft-spoken demeanor was a pilot with extraordinary instincts, calculated aggression, and unbreakable nerves. After receiving the Medal of Honor from President Roosevelt, Foss participated in war bond drives across the country. He traveled from city to city, speaking before crowds who idolized him. America needed heroes, and Joseph Foss became one of the most recognizable faces of the Marine Corps. Photographs of him in his flight jacket, flanked by smiling civilians or fellow servicemen, circulated widely. Still, he never grew comfortable with the attention. To Foss, his fallen comrades were the real heroes. He always carried their memory with him. Rather than rest on his laurels, Foss pushed to return to active service. By mid-1943, he had recovered from malaria and was reassigned to train new pilots. The Marine Corps recognized that his first-hand experience over Guadalcanal was invaluable. He became an instructor and eventually took command of Marine Fighting Squadron 115, VMF 115, which would go on to fly the newer F4U Corsair. While the Wildcat had served valiantly, the Corsair was a leap forward in technology, faster, more powerful, and better suited for the evolving aerial battles in the Pacific. Foss quickly adapted to the new machine and took his squadron to the front lines once again, this time in the Marshall Islands. Though he did not achieve the same volume of aerial victories as on Guadalcanal, his leadership was instrumental in sharpening his squadron's readiness. He demanded discipline, but he also inspired fierce loyalty. His philosophy as a commander was simple: never ask your men to do something you wouldn't do yourself. Foss often flew the most dangerous missions alongside his pilots, placing himself in harm's way just as he had done months earlier. His understanding of combat, his calm under fire, and his tactical insight saved lives and won victories. Even in the moments where he wasn't pulling the trigger, his presence elevated those around him. One of his main contributions during this period was helping new pilots transition from training to actual combat. He knew the fear that crept in the cockpit, the moment you realized the enemy was no longer just a silhouette on a chalkboard, but a thinking, lethal opponent in the sky. Foss coached his men to think, adapt, and never fly alone. He reinforced the importance of formation tactics, what had saved his own life over and over again. Though his second combat tour was shorter, Joseph Foss's return to the Pacific theater cemented his reputation as more than just a fighter ace. He had evolved into a tactician, a mentor, and a builder of warrior culture. The Marine Corps knew they had something rare in him, a man who could fight and lead with equal brilliance. By the end of 1944, Foss was ordered back to the United States, this time permanently. The war was entering its final, most destructive phase, and though he was eager to continue flying, higher command believed he could better serve in strategic or administrative roles. It was a difficult adjustment for someone who had lived with the roar of propellers in his ears and the scent of aviation fuel in his lungs. But Foss, as always, carried out his orders with dignity. After the war ended, Foss transitioned back into civilian life. Like many returning veterans, he faced the question, what now? The world he returned to was different from the one he had left. The Great Depression was over, but so too was the singular focus of total war. America was turning toward prosperity and rebuilding, and Foss had to figure out where he fit into that picture. He chose to return to his roots. In 1946, he helped found the South Dakota Air National Guard and served as its first commanding officer. At a time when the future of air power was being debated and redefined, Foss was among those who believed in a strong, citizen-based air force. His leadership helped train and organize a generation of post-war pilots. But Joseph Foss was not done serving his country. He turned his attention to politics, successfully running for the South Dakota House of Representatives. His popularity and integrity made him a respected figure in the state's political scene, and he later served 2 terms as governor of South Dakota from 1955 to 1959. As governor, he focused on infrastructure, education, and improving the lives of veterans. He didn't seek power for its own sake. He saw public office as another way to serve. Even in politics, he carried himself like the Marine he once was, direct, disciplined, and unshakably honest. Journalists and constituents alike found him approachable and sincere. He refused to engage in political theatrics, preferring straight talk and practical solutions. His time in office proved that the courage he showed in the cockpit was matched by a quiet strength in leadership. But the call of aviation never truly left him. In the decades that followed, Foss remained active in aviation circles, attending air shows, advising young pilots and supporting military history initiatives. He was a living legend, not because he sought the spotlight, but because he had earned every accolade. In the next part, we will explore his role as commissioner of the American Football League, his media presence, his later life reflections on war and peace, and how he became a bridge between generations. A pilot whose legacy extended far beyond the skies of Guadalcanal. As the 1950s gave way to a new era of technology, media, and post-war prosperity, Joseph Foss found himself entering another unlikely chapter of his extraordinary life, one that would take him from the skies of the South Pacific to the heart of American sports and television. While most fighter aces returned to private life or military careers, Foss's journey was just beginning. In 1960, the burgeoning world of professional football was undergoing rapid transformation. The National Football League, NFL, had dominated the American sports landscape for decades, but a new challenger had emerged, the American Football League, AFL. Looking for someone with proven leadership, integrity, and national recognition, the AFL's owners selected an unlikely candidate to be their first commissioner, Joseph Foss. He was not a football executive. He had no deep background in sports administration, but he was Joseph Foss, Medal of Honor recipient, war hero, governor and national figure. His presence immediately brought credibility to the league. At press conferences, his calm demeanor and confident voice reassured investors and the media that the AFL was serious. Foss approached the role as he had approached every mission, with discipline, clarity, and strategic focus. He wasn't there to just lend his name. He rolled up his sleeves and went to work. He traveled constantly, meeting with owners, players, advertisers, and broadcasters. His goal was to turn the AFL into a viable alternative to the NFL, and he knew that required more than good intentions. It demanded visibility, structure, and excitement. Under Foss's guidance, the AFL signed lucrative television contracts, expanded to new cities, and began to attract top talent, including Heisman Trophy winners and star quarterbacks. Perhaps his most important contribution was his insistence on parity and competitive balance. He believed that no team should dominate just because it had more resources. Every team, he argued, needed a fair chance to win, just as every pilot in the air deserved an equal shot at survival, regardless of rank or experience. Though Foss stepped down as commissioner in 1966, just before the AFL-NFL merger, his tenure laid the groundwork for one of the most successful eras in American sports history. The AFL would go on to merge with the NFL in 1970, and many of its innovations, including colorful uniforms, aggressive passing offenses, and television-friendly presentation, became staples of modern football. Even after his time in sports, Foss was never content to fade into retirement. He had become a household name and a symbol of American resolve. During the 1970s and 80s, he shifted again, this time into media. Foss hosted the television program The American Sportsman, where he traveled across the country and the world, engaging in outdoor adventures, hunting, fishing, and interviewing celebrities and veterans. The show wasn't just entertainment, it was a celebration of nature, heritage, and patriotism. Viewers were drawn to Foss, not because he was flashy, but because he was authentic. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. Whether he was fly fishing in Alaska or talking about the mechanics of aerial combat, he remained grounded, sincere, and deeply American. He brought a quiet wisdom to every episode, offering insights drawn from a life lived at the edge, from the cockpit to the governor's office to the broadcast studio. By the 1980s, Foss had become more vocal about veteran issues. He visited military hospitals, spoke at reunions, and participated in forums about the future of American defense. He believed deeply in supporting the next generation of warriors. Unlike some of his peers who grew bitter with age, Foss maintained a sense of purpose. He often said that the only reason he survived Guadalcanal was so he could spend the rest of his life giving back. He became president of the National Rifle Association from 1988 to 1990, where he promoted responsible firearm ownership and education. Though his views were occasionally controversial, Foss never shied away from public debate. He believed in the Constitution, in civic responsibility, and in the duty of every citizen to be informed and engaged. But perhaps his most important contribution during this time was as a mentor. Foss took hundreds of calls and letters from young people across America, aspiring pilots, military cadets, and high school students curious about history. He responded to nearly all of them. He believed that storytelling was essential to understanding sacrifice. If the next generation forgot Guadalcanal, he warned, they might not be ready for what the future would bring. One of the most touching moments of his later years occurred during a trip to the Solomon Islands in the 1990s. Foss stood quietly at the old site of Henderson Field, now overgrown with jungle and faded by time. A local official asked him if he remembered the battles. Foss nodded. "I remember the faces," he replied. For him, war had never been about statistics or strategy. It was about the men beside him in the air, many of whom never came home. Joseph Foss continued to serve, speak, and inspire well into his 80s. His voice grew quieter, but his message remained powerful. He believed in faith, family, and freedom, not as political slogans, but as truths earned in blood and tested in fire. In the next part, we'll explore the final years of his life, the legacy he left behind, and how history remembers a pilot who became more than just an ace. He became a symbol of American courage, honor, and resilience. As the 1990s drew to a close, Joseph Foss had become a revered figure across multiple generations of Americans. For some, he was the fearless Marine aviator who matched Eddie Rickenbacker's record in the deadly skies of Guadalcanal. For others, he was the political leader, the football commissioner, the outdoor sportsman, or the thoughtful mentor who never refused a request for a story, a signature, or a handshake. But to those who knew him best, he was simply Joe, a man of faith, humility, and unwavering purpose. Even as his physical health declined with age, his voice remained steady when speaking about the values he had always held dear: duty, honor, service. He frequently traveled across the United States, attending aviation heritage events, Veterans Day memorials, and youth leadership seminars. When asked what sustained him through his long and varied career, he always returned to the same themes: a belief in something greater than oneself, the power of discipline, and the importance of telling the truth, even when it was difficult. 1 of his final missions in life was ensuring that the stories of the Second World War would never fade. He became a passionate advocate for preserving veteran testimony. He understood that the lessons of Guadalcanal and beyond weren't just about tactics or aircraft design. They were about the character of individuals placed in unimaginable situations. In 2001, at the age of 86, Foss published his autobiography, Joe Foss, Flying Marine. In it, he reflected not just on the thrill of combat, but on the burden of survival. He revisited the fear and exhilaration of aerial duels, the crushing loss of fallen comrades, and the strange silence that follows war, when the guns are quiet, but the memories echo endlessly. The book resonated deeply with veterans and younger readers alike. It was a reminder that behind every decoration lies a man, and behind every mission, a choice. Foss was particularly proud of his work with youth organizations. He frequently spoke at high schools and military academies, often telling stories from Guadalcanal, not to glorify combat, but to teach resilience. One of his most repeated messages was simple: courage is doing what needs to be done, even when you're scared to death. In January 2003, Joseph Foss was preparing for a trip to speak at the U.S. Air Force Academy. While going through airport security in Phoenix, he was detained by TSA agents because of a Medal of Honor that he had packed in his briefcase. The agents, unaware of what the medal represented, questioned him and delayed his travel. Foss was not angry. Instead, he used the moment to highlight a painful truth: too many Americans had forgotten their history. He later commented with characteristic grace, "It's not their fault. If we don't teach them, how can they know?" It became a rallying cry for his final years. America must remember. Its heroes must be known. Its lessons must be taught. In late 2002, Foss suffered a serious stroke. Though he fought hard through rehabilitation, his health never fully recovered. On January 1st, 2003, Joseph Foss passed away in Scottsdale, Arizona, at the age of 87. His death marked the passing of an era, not just of aviation, but of a generation that had fought not for fame or fortune, but for freedom. The outpouring of tributes was immense. From military officials to political leaders, from sports figures to school children, America mourned the loss of one of its finest. President George W. Bush ordered that Foss be buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His funeral was a somber and patriotic occasion, with Marines standing at attention and aircraft flying overhead in tribute. In the years that followed, numerous schools, aviation centers, and veteran institutions were named in his honor. The legacy of Joseph Foss was enshrined not just in buildings, medals, or memorials, but in the hearts of those he had inspired: pilots, students, leaders, and everyday citizens who saw in him a reflection of the best this country had to offer. But perhaps the most powerful legacy he left behind was something quieter, a model of how to live. He had shown that one could be brave without being reckless, humble without being silent, and successful without losing one's soul. In the final part, we'll examine in depth the enduring legacy of Foss, how his combat achievements reshaped American aviation, how his leadership still influences today's Marine Corps and Air National Guard, and why, decades later, the name Joseph Foss continues to symbolize a rare kind of heroism, the kind that endures long after the war is over. Long after the gunfire had stopped echoing over the jungles of Guadalcanal, and decades after the propellers of the F4F Wildcat had ceased spinning in combat, the name Joseph Foss continued to resonate, not just as a war hero, but as a national symbol of integrity, resilience, and service. His 26 confirmed aerial victories placed him among the elite of American fighter pilots, but more than just numbers. Foss's combat career represented a turning point in the Pacific War. During the darkest hours of the Guadalcanal campaign, when the United States was still uncertain of its footing, Joseph Foss brought hope. His fearless flying inspired Marines on the ground and motivated fellow aviators in the air. The Japanese Zero, once considered nearly unbeatable, had met its match in Foss and his disciplined squadron. His style of leadership, based on teamwork, humility, and calculated risk, helped redefine how Marine Corps aviation operated in hostile environments. Unlike some pilots who sought solo glory, Foss emphasized communication, formation flying, and coordinated tactics. These principles were adopted widely by other squadrons and contributed to the overall success of the U.S. air campaign across the Pacific. But his influence didn't stop at the cockpit. In founding the South Dakota Air National Guard, Foss helped bring post-war military aviation into the modern age. He understood that future conflicts would demand trained, ready airmen, not just active duty personnel, but well-prepared citizen pilots who could be called upon in times of national crisis, the very existence and strength of today's air. National Guard, with its emphasis on state-level readiness and federal integration, owes something to Foss's early vision. In politics, Foss was a rare figure, honest, plain-spoken, and driven by principle. He refused to engage in petty rivalries or self-promotion. He governed South Dakota with the same tactical precision he had once used in the skies. Identify the goal, eliminate distractions, move forward. As commissioner of the AFL, he applied the same philosophy. While it might seem a departure from military service, the world of sports, like the battlefield, required leadership, strategy, and the ability to unify people from different backgrounds toward a common goal. Foss's success in guiding the AFL laid the foundation for a merger that ultimately created the most successful professional sports league in American history. And in the world of television and media, he served as a storyteller, not just of battles fought, but of life itself. Whether casting a line into a quiet river or recounting a dogfight over the Solomon Sea, Foss always returned to the values that mattered: courage, clarity, and commitment. For veterans, he became a voice. Calm, steady, and credible, he knew the pain of loss and the weight of survival. His advocacy helped build awareness for post-traumatic stress, proper veterans' care, and the need to tell the truth about war. Not to glorify it, but to learn from it. He often said that freedom was not free and that the cost should never be forgotten. His Medal of Honor wasn't stored in a glass case. He carried it in a briefcase, showed it to students, and even allowed strangers to hold it. To him, it wasn't just a decoration. It was a symbol of every man who didn't make it home. "I wear it for them," he said more than once. Today, the name Joseph Foss lives on in more than just military textbooks. The Joe Foss Institute, founded after his death, works tirelessly to promote civic education, patriotism, and leadership among young Americans. His message, that character counts, that leadership is service, and that courage is quiet, continues to inspire new generations. He is remembered in aviation museums, in Air National Guard facilities, in schools, and in homes where sons and daughters still learn about the Wildcat ace who soared through hell and came back with wisdom. To this day, pilots study his tactics. Leaders cite his example, teachers tell his story, and somewhere above the clouds, one can almost imagine a wildcat diving through the sun. Steady hands at the controls, eyes sharp with purpose, heart quiet with resolve. That was Joseph Foss, and that is why we remember.